All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for sticking around. Let's jump right into it. Actually, before we do, I want to make this as like interactive as possible. If like people have like questions, if you guys want to, kind of similar to the vibe of the last one. Like if you guys want to start like, calling each other out on stuff or posing your own questions or take it whichever way. Let's keep it like really flexible. So to start, maybe we just do a little round of intros. You want to start at that end?
Sure. My name is Paul. I am a knower of things at Polygon. I do all sorts of stuff there. I've worked in crypto for a long time, built Augur, so prediction markets, all that kind of stuff. Currently working on egg layer, scaling interoperability between all this modular rollups.
Cool. I'm Matt. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Caldera. We are one of the largest rollup ecosystems on Ethereum. We help people spin up their own customizable, dedicated L2s and L3s, all connected by our interop solution, the meta layer.
Hello everyone, this is Yash. I'm building Search. It's an execution layer on Bitcoin. I've been in this space for like 3+ years, being a CPO for a self-custody wallet. That's how I got introduced to Web3 and multiple ecosystem. Excited to be part of the.
Hi everyone, I'm Matt here, head of BD of Redstone, which is an Oracle provider, and we specifically focus on yield-bearing collateral for lending markets across all different ecosystems. We are also built in a modular way, which allows us to quickly deploy on new chains and be very flexible when it comes to VMs, when it comes to update conditions and all that good stuff.
Awesome. Let's just start off with like what's the state of modular? I feel like I know it's really, really broad, but like people were super, it comes in waves. People were super bullish on this stuff. Like, I mean, some of this is touching on, if anyone was around for the last panel, like we indexed really, really hard on like app chains, kind of like all of these different like microservice architecture kind of things. And now I guess sentiment's kind of like shifting back. So like, what's your guys' take? Like, where are things, does that, do you disagree with that, by the way? Like, do you think that like people are still kind of thinking along the lines of like, very modular systems, or are you guys seeing in practice the sentiment be more like, hey, maybe that's overkill for now?
I'll jump in, I guess. It's really funny. Like, it's very true that the sentiment of that has like gone way down. But if you actually look at like what people are building, I think that when modular was at its peak, a lot of people were like, what I want to build, what I'm going to end up building is like a big general purpose L2 using like Celestia as DA, which was a great business at the time, and I think there was a real play to be made there. Now, of course, because it's so much easier to launch a chain, they actually need like real differentiation. And so what we're seeing a lot of are like actually more application-specific networks, or at the very least, this concept of quote unquote like purpose-built chains. So at least like chains for a specific community or a specific set of applications. I actually think Abstract is like a good example of this. So from our perspective, like, the narrative is not dead, and it actually might be stronger now in terms of builder adoption than it was in the past.
Yeah, I was going to say this. It's like, I think the narrative that we talk about here, like, really leads what's actually happening in a lot of ways. But like, at Polygon, we've been building this shit forever. And I think in the last, in the last 3 months, I think we've had like more inbound on app chains than ever before. Why? Because everybody's like, going to go run on Mega ETH. But really, people want to build their business, and they want to build their application. They want to build a contract with their users, not a smart contract, like a normal relationship in order to make a thing that works. And that just kind of like requires modularity, because there's tons of different pieces that matter for all of those. If you're trying to do some regulatory arbitrage, you need to be extremely decentralized. If you're trying to build a video game, censorship is a feature, not a bug. So I think that like the modularity is just a bunch of stuff that we're going to start see being used to build the actual applications people want, and the narrative isn't really dead.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with this point, right? So the sentiment is pretty down. Mostly, I think Web3 is filled with developers, and we are so much tech focused, and we tend to like, forget the user side of stuff. So modular thesis has done pretty well. Like I think last year, before that year, I think Celsius brought in the whole, they did very good job in terms of putting this message out of modularity, right? And even like in Bitcoin, people started thinking about modularity, and what we are also trying to do is like build a modular stack on Bitcoin, so use Bitcoin as a settlement layer, where you can actually use inscriptions. I mean, now there is all these ordinals and rules kind of prove some use case. I mean, there is some room there to experiment and build. And I'm seeing like a lot of experiment happening even in the Bitcoin space. There is BitVM, which is still in a concept and experiment stage, but it kind of reflects what you can do. And it's all like goes back to the credits goes back to the modular thesis at the end of the day. But yeah, I think overall sentiment is down because we just like are very tech focused. But otherwise, like we said, there is more demand now in terms of community focused app chains or any protocols that want to like build specific use cases. I think that's what we are heading towards. And I'm sure people are talking about a lot of consumer focused stuff and apps in Denver.
Yeah, I think this is kind of like the reality check moment for the market, where there has been a huge narrative spun up that a lot of people bought in back in the day. So a lot of great tech has been built out of it, Celestia being one great example here. And then obviously there is a great lag between the narrative of the early stage tech being brought to production and the actual usage really kicking in, and the flywheel effect kicking in as well. So we are kind of in the middle ground, right, between the narrative itself and the adoption itself. But really, when you look at the fundamentals on how that looks like, using Celestia as an example as well, gaining market share when it comes to DA rapidly, I would say. Still, maybe not generating a ton of revenue, but this is probably not the point at this part of the adoption cycle on the adoption curve. The tech works well, and it just attracts more and more chains being built on top of it. So the narrative is no longer as hot as it was, because narratives never last that long. But when you really look at some of the fundamental metrics and what people really choose when they want to build a blockchain, when they want to have access to block space, that just shows in the fundamental values. So I believe directionally we are on the right path. It's just that this is kind of the stage between the initial euphoria and the actual usage that comes later.
Yeah, the narrative's changed so fast anyway. Like that could come back next freaking 2 months. It almost doesn't matter. I just wanted to get a read on this, how you guys saw the state of things. And okay, fine, narrative comes, a lot of resources go into a thing, people start building, good, but it takes realistically a while. It's not like everybody gets PMF overnight when they all flood in, right? It takes a bit. Those are startups.
Yeah, this is the thing, this is just like working with business, right? We're engineers, right? So we need to work with business. They say, hey, is this possible? We say, yes, it's possible. And then they say, how long will it take? And we say 6 months. And then they say 3 months. And we say 6 months. And it just takes a long time to actually build this stuff. And it's boring. Honestly, a lot of it's boring work. It's people sitting there writing back-end services, making things work, making libraries function. And so I'm not so concerned with the narrative of that. I'm more concerned about the use cases and the things that we're starting to be able to build, because these tools are more accessible. If we look at the most actually successful piece of software in the blockchain industry, it's friggin' Tendermint, right? It's these components which are boring in a way, but they've really unlocked the ability for builders to come up with new use cases. So, yeah, I mean, I guess we're all gonna agree with each other. Does anybody think Tendermint sucks? Or?
Not really. I mean, we are also using it.
Yeah.
So, all right, so what has PMF, right? We went through this cycle. Who cares about sentiment? You guys are saying things are building. What has PMF, and why is modularity, however you define that, crucial for that PMF? I know you mentioned a couple of general examples, but let's just really, I think a lot of people really want to get concrete with it. So what are you guys seeing?
I think Hyperliquid has PMF. If we look at a project, and we look at a thing, they have 100% PMF, and they were is that a modular stack? They're using tons of modular components, right? Another project, Barachain, whatever. We don't necessarily, depending on how you feel about DeFi, but they engaged that user base. What are they using? Tons of modular components from a software perspective. And so I think those two are good examples of things which, because of all this work that's been able to happen, have been able to build and really speak to their user.
This is where it becomes just like a super semantic debate, which we don't need to have right now, like around like, like what's technically modular, what's not. But I think, yeah, you're right. Like I think the most important thing is like there's a bunch of different components and people are like, those components like start to get a lot of usage and they get more robust and kind of form their own network effects. And like you obviously are just going to like use them to efficiently build your startup. And so like, okay, but I guess I more so meant from like an app. So I guess you mentioned Hyperliquid. What do you guys think? Any other takes? Like, I think a lot of people are aware of Hyperliquid at this point. I think that's like a great use case or example. But like, what else is PMF?
So I would say from our perspective as an infrastructure provider, we actually have our little, it's not a blockchain, it's kind of a decentralized cloud, but basically the way it works is all our price feeds live in this decentralized cloud, and this decentralized cloud is composed of many, many different services, proprietary gateways, PubSub networks, potentially a DA layer in the future as well. So we don't really think about this in terms of, a narrative, because this is not a blockchain that we have internally, but when it comes to getting to the actual use case, how that works is because we are able to plug in and out different services. If something, is no longer relevant, we can plug this out. If something new comes up that really makes us bump up the performance of that specific component, then we can plug this in. This means we can basically deploy the price feeds on all possible chains, all possible VMs with pretty limited efforts needed for that. So this is kind of the leverage that we get as builders by being able to actually use the infrastructure that is specialized for some specific purpose. And I believe this is exactly the same situation you have right now while launching an app chain or a general purpose chain or any form of block space out there.
I think PMF is sort of like fragmented, right? So if you look at all the general purpose L2s and stuff, I think the more we're seeing, they're just kind of farming the same user base, right? Or users who been already familiar with the tech, and they're just going back to like same chain after a chain, chain after a chain. I think the pie has not grown beyond it, right? So I would say DeFi definitely, has a product market fit. There's no doubt about it, right? I think some of the use case that we want to like bring in is as simple as if somebody is holding a Bitcoin in a self-custody way, can they lend and borrow? Like as simple as that, right? I think definitely DeFi crypto has seen a PMF, but just that it's a little bit fragmented. I think we need like more probably consumer use cases and apps that are built using all this infrastructure that is in place, and I think then we will see a much bigger mass adoption of the tech. Yeah.
Just to dig into that a little bit more, like what in DeFi besides Hyperliquid, you mentioned that as an example, that makes sense. What else in DeFi it has PMF like because of certain aspects of like how people can perceive modularity?
DEX is another use case. The DEX are now. Whatever you're seeing in centralized exchanges, DEX would be the another good PMF, I would say.
You guys think anything?
I'm actually curious about what you're trying to get at with the question. Are you asking for like app level products that are specifically enabled by modularity that have PMF?
Yeah, exactly. Like specifically enabled by modularity that like, hey, this thing just like wouldn't work at all on like a general purpose smart contract environment, or there's some aspect where it's like, oh man, you know what, like this really needed extra pre-comps or something like faster pre-comps, something like that like has very clear PMF because of what people traditionally think about as like modularity.
Yeah, I think my honest answer to this might honestly kind of sidestep the question a little bit. But I really think like the benefits of modularity are not necessarily providing like something that is truly like lacks substitution. That does happen. Like we are working with some teams in let's say like gaming that I think will just need so much scale that they're going to not only need one chain, but they're going to need multiple different chains. And so like there's something where you can say, hey, like if that thing works, it really has PMF and it was not accelerated by modularity, but uniquely enabled by modularity. I think there are like a lot of other businesses that are really interesting that 5 years from now we might say, wow, that's a business that has great PMF, and some core aspect of that business was enabled by modularity. It could be better monetization, it could be lowering fees, et cetera. One thing I'm really excited about is like stablecoin payments. We're working with a team out of Founders Inc. Called AppChain that is building this product called ETH Cash on their own chain, sort of like a Venmo competitor. Obviously, there's like Pay.Link, which I think is on its own chain powered by Celestia. If those things succeed, they're going to hit a scale where it's going to be obvious in hindsight that they'll require modularity. But of course, right now, if you wanted to, you could build that business on Base and eat the fees. So I just think just like as there wasn't anything that was like totally only enabled by the cloud, I would say like you always could have racked your own servers. Like modularity is kind of the same thing.
Yeah, there's like one case there which is like Google managed to use like consumer level hardware at such a scale that they were able to like meet a cost and performance and reliability level that was different than anywhere else in the market, and it changed the landscape. There's very few things that are those full replacements, but they do change the speed to market, the time to market, and the flexibility of the products that you build, where you could adapt products to a user instead of the other way around. I don't feel like we've actually done a good job of taking advantage of all the tech we've built yet here. Truthfully, like we've dreamed up a lot of ideas that I feel like could be made better. Like when I was working at Augur, like we had a central limit order book on Ethereum. We then turned that into a decentralized central limit order book off-chain, off of Ethereum. All of those things could be built so much better now in Hyperliquid. Good example of somebody trying to do this. But everybody's been really caught up just in the cycle of trying to make the money off their tokens and do the trading and whatnot. And so we haven't gotten those fully built out yet, but they're coming. We have people asking about them, and they're more possible now than they were 7 years ago.
What surprised you guys? What surprised you guys along on the journey building of like, oh wow, I didn't realize that this like certain component would be so needed in the market. I mean, like there's the obviously the modular is super like broad, right? Like there's the tradition, like how this kind of started was around like the different layers of a given chain, and then they're like kind of that blossomed into like, okay, well, actually, there's little modules like within each of these layers and all that. Has there been anything that's like surprised you guys in practice of like, holy shit, like people actually need this module a lot?
I think it's the role of the kind of proposer of blocks, the role of like sequencing proposers, that kind of stuff that's working now with the based rollups, like this design space. I think we're finding that in order to give a really good user experience, you often need sophisticated entities that are able to operate at that level. And by splitting those things off, we actually give a more efficient market for people to compete on their ability to execute a particular thing, right? So old school flashbots, we opened up the market for people to figure out how to do MEV, which actually kind of blew up the landscape, right? So when I joined the blockchain space, I kind of thought like, oh, Ethereum, like we'll just have this world computer and it'll just kind of operate and it'll all be trustless, and you can sort of program away the actors. And I think what I was surprised by is how important the actors are, and thus the incentives that you use to align them.
Yeah, for me, I think actually, as I've gotten deeper into building the business and working with a lot of great builders, the most interesting thing to me has been kind of token models and token go-to-market. I think this has actually been a weakness of L2s and therefore like modular chains for quite some time. L1s actually don't have good tokenomics, but they have very tractable default tokenomics. You have staking, you have fees, some amount of moneyness, all those things are necessarily things that you don't get if you're launching L2 with ETH as the gas token, as most general purpose L2s have been before. I think this is actually really bullish for modularity in the long term, because unlike L1s, L2s are actually, they tend to run profitable. They don't need to inflate a token supply to gain security. There's a lot of flexibility there for token models, but it's a very underexplored space. And so token models, on that front, something we're thinking very deeply about, just providing stronger defaults for teams who actually want to introduce tokens into their modular ecosystems and align community that way. And then as well, like the kind of token go-to-market. I think this is one of the reasons why Solana has been very, very successful right now, is that, you know, if you launch a token on Solana, there's a really healthy ecosystem of like liquidity and dexes and everything else. Modularity, like, you know, we've kind of fragmented that on Ethereum, but it doesn't necessarily need to be that way. I think it's just, we haven't actually thought too much. When we're thinking about interoperability, we're always thinking about it from the perspective of a user. I want to bridge this token to this chain. That overlaps with projects sometimes, but not fully. And so a lot of when we're thinking about interoperability and building products on that front as well, it's like from a token issuer perspective, how do I get my token in as many venues as possible?
Great answer.
Yeah, I think I'll probably talk about what we are actually building, right? So something inspired us to work on Bitcoin. I mean, we talk about RWA, you know, tokenizing the assets and bringing on chain. I think Bitcoin is one of the oldest. I mean, it has most of the liquidity, and you know, if as simple as use case of you know, in a trust minimized way, how can you move Bitcoin from, you know, the Bitcoin layer BTC from Bitcoin to another network? That's still broken, right? So you have all this WBTC, I mean, which is literally centralized. You know, there are few multisigs who are actually controlling it, and then you have a decentralized version of wrap tokens, in which case it's kind of shared with probably a bunch of nodes on a network, but still it is permission, right? So you have to go through some sort of a permission process to get into that network and, you know, be part of it. So I think that's something we see as a huge you know, demand, or it's a problem statement to work on. That's what we are like kind of trying to solve. How can we make this whole movement of BTC from Bitcoin to like other layers, or as simple as if app want to build a use case and they really don't want to like get into other you know, ecosystem, they just want the execution part of it, and we see like a lot of demand there.
So I'll just add, because the original question was about like what surprised us about that specific thing. So I think the eye-opening moment for me was watching the, I believe that was John Adler's, one of the co-founders of Celestia, the talk that he's given a couple of years back on the resources that you actually need to have in place to compose a blockchain, and then arguing that you need a decoupled DA layer just to make it more efficient. So I sometimes come back to this talk in the sense that it, you know, we sometimes used to have this very simple thinking of a blockchain, which is basically, as you said, basically a computer, but multiplicated many times. Whereas it's more complicated than that, right? So like specialization on specific levels is just becoming more and more important. And I think this is a great resource to come back to from time to time to get a better understanding of that.
I think we're nearing time, but I wanted to ask about cost and value accrual. So like cost, let's just say like operating cost, right? Like, so actually, Matt, this could be interesting from you guys. I know you guys are helping people launch a lot of chains. Like, is it actually cheap to like, I mean, I know like operationally, yes, but like the upfront costs of like paying different like infrastructure providers, et cetera, like, is it actually affordable, or does it end up, you know, eating up a lot of your raised capital?
Depends on whether you want USDC or not.
Yeah, it's the honest answer is like it's as affordable or as expensive as you want it to be. You know, you can, like, let's say block explorers, right? They range from like literally free open source software you can run on your own box, we'll run it for you, to 7-figure per year, like, you know, deal for the, you know, the best block explorer, the most premium, you know, option. And you see that repeated basically at every level of the stack, right? Oracles, interop, like wallets, maybe. Like, I think one thing though that we're seeing, which is, which is really encouraging, is that a lot of the businesses, like there are like a lot of these kind of legacy businesses that have been built in Web3, where the business model has been an assumption that there are going to be very few chains launched, and so they need to max extract value from those few chains, and that's how we get these like 7+ figure deal sizes. That actually now, with so many new chains launching, that opens up a huge avenue for creative destruction and new entrants to join into the space, who will charge you 6 figures or 5 figures, or will launch for free and make money some other way. And I think like you kind of have this like iterative flywheel here, where like as more chains get launched, it enables more of those new businesses, new business models to thrive, which makes it easier for new chains to launch. And like you see that. And so for us, like this was really, really hard for us when we got started. We were like, we don't know how to do it. Maybe we'll need to fork every single thing on the stack. We'll need to fork Chainlink. We'll need to fork, interop. Like we'll need to build our own wallet. Now it's like become like, thankfully we haven't needed to do that because business models have evolved.
You know what this reminds me of? I don't know if anybody else was like a early, like late 90s, early 2000s web dev, but it used to be really expensive to just like run a website. Like any website was really expensive. Like a domain name was like $100. Now they're 10. You needed like some server or somewhere, set something up. Your database was expensive. People spent millions of dollars on Oracle licenses to run a blog. Like, just dumb, right? And that's shifted. And I think what you're talking about here is that like as the scale of everything goes out, you start to differentiate on those levels, and you get a lot more competition, and it brings it all down. Will the top end ever go away? No. But will the Stripes of the world truly disrupt, the whatever that old payment system was? Yes. So I think that right now it's actually incredibly affordable, probably way cheaper than running a moderately sized website in 2004 to run a blockchain now.
So I might tap into that as a service provider for blockchains as well. We also work with Caldera as an Oracle provider. So actually, when you want to launch a chain quickly, you can have oracles for free as well. It's not going to be us, but specifically what you're paying for, and we are not inexpensive by any means. We're not as expensive as chaining is, obviously, but still, there is a price point that you have to pay. So basically, at this point, we are not going to be for everybody, for all the chains that are going to be launching there. What you're paying for is basically the curation aspect. It's fairly easy to just spin up just an oracle using UniV2 pools or UniV3 pools and just do a simple TWAP on top of that. But not every asset should have an oracle. If you want to use it in like financial use cases, for example, leverage loop it on lending markets. And also, if you want to do an oracle for a certain asset, you have to kind of have the know-how to do it in a safe way so that your users don't get liquidated where they should not be liquidated, or frankly speaking, so that the protocol is not drained. So if you want to maximize things on the security aspect and go, and if money starts flowing into your blockchain, you've got a couple hundred million or a couple billion of TVL, then the open source free to use services that are probably best for the beginning are no longer going to be sufficient, and that's where the curation and the know-how comes into play. That's where you need a professional in that specific regard to be able to say, yes, we are safe, we are able to have Pendle, Morpho, Compound, Venus, whoever else, couple billion dollar markets on the chain because the level of infrastructure is good enough. But really, if you want to launch quickly, there is just options for you to just plug and play.
I think totally right. So I used to do a lot of development, I think in 2008, 9, 10, build like small application for businesses. Even like, I think building a website was so complex. There was so much frameworks like WordPress and Joomla, if you guys recall. I think that was a lot expensive to build. If you compare that to what we have right now, it's so easy to like kind of spin up rollups, right? Even we saw that in like the whole Bitcoin ecosystem. If you observe last year sometime, I think there were so many Bitcoin rollups. They were just using, platform like Caldera, Caldera, and all these platforms. They just go click and deploy, and it has become like so much. And it surprised us, and we were thinking, okay, should we do like a roll-up and service for Bitcoin? And then it was okay, like that doesn't make sense, right? It's just that interest, and it's so easy to do it, right? And everybody is just jumping to that whole narrative and just launch and roll-up because it's affordable. But when you get into specific of it, I think that's when it becomes expensive. You want to like solve specific, part of it. I think then you will get into a lot of custom development, and then then that goes on, right? So yeah.
No, I honestly, as somebody who's building a roll up, like I see a lot of areas to innovate that most people don't really talk about today. Like kind of you said, like different token models. Like I think there's actually a much bigger design space too, right? Like different as actual apps gain PMF, for certain app chains. I'm sure like when something becomes really, really important, like how you govern it actually starts to become more interesting to the people who really, really care. I think there's other like kind of value redistribution things you can do. Like there's like a ton that's like not even really tech. It just has to do with the, I'll say like open, more free kind of like market at each layer of the stack. So I from my vantage point, like that's been a really interesting thing to see just like us think through. And because like as we're building Fluent, it's like, okay, well, actually, we have a lot of room to innovate or think through a big design space all across the board. So I've personally found that to be like the most interesting thing. So what about value accrual? Like, you can have, all this innovation. I mean, does that just create kind of like a race to zero, or what do you see as the future of value accrual in these stacks? Start with you.
So when you look at the history of software and technology in general, the value generally tends to accrue at the top, so at the app level. Whoever owns the relationship with the end user tends to accrue the most value. This is probably an oversimplification, but in the grand scheme of things, this is how that works. So whenever you see applications with like complete chain abstraction, you don't even know that there is chains being used underneath it. This might be Solana or Ethereum at the same time, and the end user does not even know if what's happening on the back end. In that end state, probably 99.9% of that value is going to be accrued to the specific DApp on the DApp level. But then there is probably going to be clusters like, for example, AWS by Amazon. So you get big enough to have a mode where you're able to actually be the default infrastructure for building specific things, and this gives you pricing power. Okay, so as long as the underlying infrastructure is not completely commoditized, which can be the case, this is the case for many industries, then the pricing power of the underlying infrastructure is also going to be quite high. But if this is commoditized, then I would say the apps or apps in general are just going to be the main venue for value accrual in the long term.
I think it's much more fair distribution in Web3, right? So far what we have seen in Web2, it kind of gets concentrated with those who are facing the users, and of course, like it kind of slims as you go down in terms of layers, and that's what the fat thesis came in, and then that's the whole idea of decentralization. So now I think on value accrual side, we are moving more towards a fair distribution of this across each player, so that we are actually like truly building the whole decentralized application. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what Matt said is very correct. So I won't rehash that. I guess the one thing I'll also note is that when we were starting the company, there's a question a lot of people asked us, like, is this going to be commoditized? I think it's kind of in the nature of like software that it's actually really hard for anything software related to be truly commoditized, because like you're making design decisions like every day, and like those first of all lead to some amount of like lock-in kind of naturally or moat. And then the second thing is just like different like quality of software leads to like different results. So like for us, even as like our space has expanded and now there are like big companies, bigger companies competing with us, right? A bunch of smaller companies, like, we are seeing a lot of people really considering like, oh yeah, we're really going to shop around to 10 different RAS providers and look at them, because, candidly for a lot of those, like the like quality or the infrastructure just isn't there, or the interfaces don't make a lot of sense. And so like all those things just built up over time lead to natural moats, and then therefore like some reasonable amount of value capture.
We need to build good businesses. And it's not a thing. It's like there's a way where we thought we bypassed that by launching tokens or something. But like everybody needs to build good businesses. And like, I don't know, take a look at other open source projects and how do they make good businesses. Most of them suck. Most of them don't have enough developers. Most of them aren't sustainable in any way. Most of them are supported by some giant corporation that does it just to kill other competitors, all that sort of stuff. And all that will happen here too. But there are cases where there's a good business that's kind of next to these infrastructure projects. And I think look at what Polygon's trying to do with EggLayer. Like EggLayer is designed to be credibly neutral. Like, we are trying to make it to be compatible with all of the different systems and all of those things. And we believe that our value accrual, or the value accrual to the Polygon ecosystem, comes because of the ability to build the best applications that interact with that, right? So I think at the end of the day, we all need to look at building good businesses, and I think that the value will accrue mostly towards those applications, but there's really good businesses at all layers. If you're the best RAS provider, the third, the fifth, there's a business there. If you know, like if you're providing a good, whatever it is, like front end, like there's a business there. So we just need to start approaching this more like traditional business, which is maybe boring to some people, but is just the reality of what it takes to build software at scale.
It's kind of funny. So it's what I'm hearing, and I actually agree with, is at each layer of the stack, this modular stack, there's room to accrue value, and I mean, more or less build like a successful business. Like, yeah, maybe more value accrues to one part over another. Like, likely, I think everybody agrees it's apps that hasn't been any different than it's traditionally worked. But that doesn't mean you can't build valuable kind of layers of developer infrastructure that plug into these things. And so, like, within then, you're also saying that there are kind of moats, even if they're seemingly like softer moats. They kind of add up to be pretty meaningful.
Yeah, even if your moat is just like, I've got the best customer support team.
Yeah. You see this in like clouds. I mean, you bring up the cloud a lot, Matt, and I agree. Like, and you see this a lot, like where somebody kind of from 1,000-foot level looking in is just like, oh, it's just all cloud compute. It's all cloud compute. And then you talk to actual developers who are building things in AWS, and they're like, okay, well, I have like these developers who have that expertise, and like, wait, that one offering actually plugs into some other things that like I really want in AWS. Also, they give me some like, I have a good relationship. They give me some support, that kind of thing. So like, I think people have traditionally overlooked these softer moats in crypto, and this probably won't be any different. At least that's my take. You guys, what do you think?
Yeah, I think there's always a way to make money on like idiosyncrasies, but really, if you want to, but I also strongly agree with what Paul said in terms of like being on top of the leaderboard for your category. So there is probably going to be like a super strong power law distribution, and we see that with how liquidity flows to different systems and doesn't flow to the others, or how hard it is for anybody else outside of Tether to build a big stablecoin business, because they've got the mode of actually centralized exchanges using them for all the biggest pairs. And even if a competitor comes in and asks, and gives them 4 or 5% yield, it's not big enough for the centralized exchanges to actually kill the main business that they have on actually making money on the Tether pairs, right? So you just have to be on the top if you really want to be something that's just going to be like the default solution in your category, a multi-billion-dollar business. But then, as the market grows, there is always going to be, area for you to actually be a little bit different than everybody else, attack a smaller niche, a smaller market, and then make good money off of it, as long as you can build a good business.
Yeah, and as people actually start, I think somebody was saying earlier that, that getting away from this, like raise a huge amount of money and like do the whole like, token thing, almost just like race to TGE and that whole like mess that I think that is, people have gotten into over the past few years, as these start to be thought of as like real businesses. Well, guess what? Like that $500 million outcome is good because like you didn't raise that much money. Like, so it actually ends up kind of being viable at different layers of the stack. So anyway, I think we're at time. Maybe we could actually just do like real quick going this way to that way. What is the killer app that you're most excited for or most hopeful for over the next 3 years?
This is complicated, but I'll say it quickly. I'm actually interested in like deeply centralized crypto adjacent applications that interact seamlessly with the decentralized components. And this is going to look things like private verifiable exchanges that nobody else can see, but that actually allow like interesting behaviors with everybody else.
Yeah, payments for me. I think payment networks are very interesting.
Yeah, I think payment stable coins. Yeah.
I would say some of the biggest illiquid markets out there becoming liquid, such as private credit, for example, or IP rights, so something that Story Protocol is doing. I really strongly resemble with those sorts of things being brought on chain and being made liquid for the first time in history.
There you have it. I think we're at time. Please give these folks a nice round of applause, and thank you all for listening.